Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 15, I think, of the Wordy Pair Podcast. Goodness, 15 of these things, and still going. Amazing, huh?
And still nobody has hunted us down and locked us up.
No. We have been canceled by several different groups, 1 or 2 per episode, but, there's still a sizable chunk of humanity that has not canceled us.
Yes,
I am
not
Rudy.
zero Harry Potter fans in that list, but
obviously.
Yes,
we don't want those people.
I am Justin. I am the canceled Justin.
And we will be talking about a movie today, and specifically the writing of the movie. And this is going to be a half-blind review. I have not seen the movie because I was complacent and forgot to watch it this week, but you've seen it.
This is going to be a 3/4 blind review because I am so out of it right now that we're going to just we're going to fumble our way through this one, but it should be worth it.
All right, let's try it.
It'll be worth it to me.
We're going to be looking at Godzilla Minus One.
Which is just Godzilla.
It's Godzilla minus... Well, the L's are closer to ones, right? So it's like Godzilla.
The -1 is arbitrary in nature, so we'll just knock the A off the end. Call it Godzilla.
Godzilla. Now it sounds like a bad musical.
It does, actually.
All right. Well,
so where do we want to start about this movie? This Godzilla movie that.
So the thing that you told me specifically about it was that it does a very good job of show don't tell. So I guess let's just get to the beginning and start at the beginning and you can kind of walk me through some of the scenes where show don't tell was a big deal, and we can talk about some of the scenes where it maybe didn't work as well or whatever.
All right, well, let's do a little bit of preparatory work here. We've got a movie that landed on U.S. shores, was supposed to be here for about a week, and then was just going to vanish from theaters.
Yeah.
That's usually the plan with a Toho release of a Godzilla movie, especially when there's a Legendary Pictures one in the lineup that, that's the one that's going to get all the media attention.
Sure. And
this movie, which cost less than $15 million to make, apparently. If I'm getting my story right, the director of the movie, I believe, was interviewed about the $15 million budget, and he kind of laughed at it and said he wished he'd had $15 million, which implies that the movie was actually much less than $15 million to make.
Interesting. So by U.S. AAA standards, this is 1/10 or 1/20th the price of just the production of a mainstream Marvel movie or something like that.
By U.S. standards, they bought a new comb for Chris Hemsworth's hair.
Yeah, something like that. And yet somehow it seems like this movie has been fairly well received.
That's probably an understatement. They ended up extending the play release time in theaters for
several weeks.
Yeah, it's been several weeks now. I think it's just now starting to sort of peter out.
Yeah.
But I believe that the movie has already broken $100 million, and that is a much better return than a lot of movies have seen lately. There's been a whole bunch of movies that have been released in the past couple of months that have been complete duds, did not make their money back, and not only did not make their money back, but probably cost studios, each something to the tune of like $300 to $500 million.
Yeah, I mean, so this is the way that I've heard people break it down. Generally speaking, the number that gets quoted is the marketing number, or I'm sorry, is the production.
No,
number.
that's the number without marketing.
Yeah.
And you can usually double that for
right. So generally, the marketing
budget.
is about the same. Generally, they allocate about the same amount for marketing as they do for production. So you can generally double the number that most people that the studios tell you this is the number. But in addition to that, you have to take into account that the fact that theaters don't give all the money that they make to the movie makers, right? So you actually have to almost double it one more time in order to determine whether the movie has broken even or not. So, just in general, a $300 million movie needs to make about $1 billion at the box office to break even.
Yeah, and that's a pretty high break-even point because that's
It
a
is.
2010s and on kind of thing. When was our first like $1 billion movies? That was early 2000s maybe. But like
you mean $1 billion box office movies?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I think it was it was along the lines of like 2003, 2004, something like that. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that Return of the King made $1 billion box office.
I don't even remember what the first movies were that started to get up into the $1 billion areas.
It was kind of, I think Avatar was one of them. They were some of the really big movies in the early 2000s that started to just barely crest $1 billion.
And then, of course, movie studios and corporations being the buffoons that they are.
Yes.
The goal, once someone has set that bar, is that everything going forward must make that amount of money because they don't know what a runaway hit means. They just they got to make that, they got to see that profit margin rise every time. And as always,
there's always a pressure to increase the budget of the next movie and the next movie and the next movie. And it's funny because there's a fairly large number of counterexamples of this, not of this backfiring in particular. Like if I remember correctly, wasn't there a movie that was really, really like the X-Men movies kind of failed after like the second one or something like that, and they started to not really make a whole lot of money. But then wasn't there that movie, what was it called, Logan, where it was kind of more like a character study, and it was also it was very like critically acclaimed by both critics and regular people, and it was fairly inexpensive by comparison to some of the CG explosion fests that had come before it.
Yeah, we had that example, and we had the example of Joker. That was another one that
yes,
kind of went that route.
One.
But once you fill people's heads once you fill an executive's head with all of these fantastic things like big blockbuster movie, explosions, action, superheroes, and they get it into their head that they have to have these giant budgets and make these giant movies, they forget that writing is an important part of this process.
And to borrow something from someone that you showed me their videos, that to get these $1 billion payouts would be barely an inconvenience.
Yeah. Yeah. And it turns out it's actually a huge inconvenience. But let's circle back to Godzilla, which it lands on US shores.
Yes.
Starts breaking Hollywood records almost immediately. I mean, I think if you don't count anime, it's the biggest foreign film that has ever hit the shores.
Oh, really? That's impressive.
This is me watching other people's videos talking about this. See, all I'm really here to talk about for sure is the movie. But from what I've heard,
itself, sure.
Godzilla Minus One is officially the #1 theatrical release of a live filmed foreign film of all time.
All foreign.
That's
not just Japan foreign.
Yeah, all foreign.
Okay,
that is what I heard. I wouldn't take my word for it because I don't research any of this. But I know it didn't beat. I think Demon Slayer and one of the Dragon Ball movies actually did better. But those
that kind of makes sense. They get that giant young person audience that watches it sometimes more than once. Things like that. A lot of hype. This movie was not hyped though.
This movie was not hyped. Not only that, but the Godzilla fan base is not a gigantic fan base, other than the new people that have been introduced to it from the Legendary Pictures movies.
Yeah,
but it wasn't a movie that was made for that audience, which is the surprising thing about looking at how well it did.
Oh, really?
Oh, it's a very mature movie. Like, my nephew loves Godzilla. He wouldn't be able to go see it because it's subtitled. There's no English release for it.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So we're talking a subtitled movie that is breaking box office records at this point.
That reframes the issue a lot more. I had assumed that there was an English dub production of it.
Oh, you've got to wander in and read this one, and
okay, wow.
I think that actually helps the movie. I think that's one of the reasons it did so well, is because people going into the theater for a change actually got to get a taste of the subtlety in Japanese storytelling.
Okay.
Which isn't to say that this is... I mean, Western movies have always been a bit more in your face about anything like that. If you sit down and watch the English release of The Ring and then watch the Japanese version, you can see where they hold your hand in the Western release, explaining everything to you as you go along.
Yeah.
The Japanese one sort of shows you as you're going, like, they give you indicators as to what is actually going on in the story without actually telling you directly.
Okay, interesting. I've seen the English The Ring, but not the Japanese one.
Yeah, the Japanese one, there were a lot of lines. They were almost the same movie, but they added extra lines for the characters in the English release, or the American release, that
right.
kind of explaining what is going on with this videotape. And I remember watching it after seeing the original, and I was just like, you didn't need to tell me that. Why did they add these extra lines in? And it just reeks of, like, not appreciating the intelligence of your audience, which I think is probably the second biggest problem that movies today are having. Like they really insult the intelligence of the audience.
Well, I mean, I wonder if it's that they're insulting the intelligence of their audience, or that they're trying to cater to an audience that's too young.
Well, I mean, I would like to say that might be the case, but then you see what's actually in the movies, and it's like, well, this is an exercise in gender studies, so you're not talking to a 5-year-old.
I see.
You're talking to someone who can,
You're talking to a 22-year-old with the mental capacity of a 5-year-old.
Okay, well, that's also true. Like a 5-year-old with the ability to somewhat interpret things that they're seeing with a hint of inquisition. Right. And I think I chose that word correctly.
Yeah, inquisition.
But it's down to the way that the story's told that really probably got people talking about it. You have an opening scene, a Japanese kamikaze pilot sitting on a beach and staring out over the water. You don't know he's a kamikaze pilot yet. You learn that within the first few minutes of the movie. But he's sort of...
Wow. Wait, no, hold on a minute. So they're actually subtle about that, too. That's pretty impressive, actually.
Well, they're not really subtle about it. They open with a hint of, clearly this person looks like they're thinking deeply about something, not really looking very happy in the moment, and just staring out over the water. Now, at this point, you're in a Godzilla movie. You don't know what's going on. This guy could be staring out over the water, and you're expecting maybe he's going to see something weird, and this is how they're going to open with Godzilla. Right. No, not at all. Not at all. He is a pilot who landed on this island in the middle of the war, or at the end of the war, I should say. That's when this movie takes place, the end of World War II. And he was supposed to be a kamikaze pilot. He was supposed to fly his plane into the enemy. Right. And it unravels really early that he had faked an engine problem and landed on this island because he wasn't ready to die. Okay. That's interesting. So the mechanics are talking to him about the plane, and one of them mentions, we can't really find any problem with the plane, and he kind of wanders off, and this pilot this mechanic approaches him and says, "Hey, I think I see what's going on, and I just want you to know that I'm with you on this. I don't think it's right to be sending our people out there dying." Something along those lines. Wow. Okay. Wow. And so you get this sense of like conflicts in reality versus what is actually making people happy in this story. He ends up staying on the island, knowing that at some point he's going to have to climb back into that plane, and that's going to be it. Yeah. But that very night is the night that a creature wanders on shore, and it's like this younger, smaller version of Godzilla kind of like the dinosaur version, and
Okay.
this is apparently some monster that the people on the island had a legend for, the Gojira monster.
Okay.
And there's this whole scene where everyone's opening fire on this monster.
When you say smaller, how large are we talking? Like,
we're talking like
20?
Jurassic Park T-Rex size, maybe a little bigger.
Kind of 20 to 30 feet kind of range.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
And so bullets are ineffective against this thing. It's causing a bit of mayhem, but it doesn't start attacking the people until it itself is attacked.
Right.
And the pilot has his gun on his airplane, should be powerful enough to kill this thing.
Sure.
It's been a couple weeks since I've seen it. I've actually forgotten the name of the pilot. But they send him to his plane, and they're like, shoot it with that. That thing will kill just about anything. He gets to the plane, and he freaks out. He can't do it for some reason. And all these other people...
he can't bring himself to do it, or there's some kind of mechanical issue?
No, he can't bring himself to do it. It's like some kind of like psychological thing where he just sort of snaps, and
Okay.
There's no real reason for him not to. Like he's clearly there. He would clearly be able to kill this thing and save everyone, but he freaks out and like war trauma or PTSD or something. Just can't do it.
Interesting.
And so these other men are forced to open fire on Godzilla as it gets closer to the little bunker they're in. And it ends up almost all of them except one gets killed. And the pilot, he gets flipped over in his plane and he's unconscious, wakes up to find out everyone else except for one man dies. And this one guy has lined up everyone on the beach and covered their bodies and just left them there as this, getting ready to bury them, basically. And he's got a broken leg. He's wandering around, just completely traumatized by everything that had happened.
Yeah.
And he unloads on the pilot for not fulfilling his duty and saving everyone by taking the monster down when he had a chance.
Right.
And this was the guy that said he was on his side at the time.
Oh, wow, okay.
About not being a kamikaze pilot. And that's how the movie opens. So you've got this guy who has failed to fulfill his duty twice. One for a reason of not wanting to die, and another for a reason of probably having experienced horrible things in the war. You don't really get a good reason for why he didn't open fire on Godzilla in that scene. But you can kind of see where he's like freaking out, like, he doesn't like the idea of even being in that plane, really, because he knows what it means.
He's kind of. I think I get what you're saying. Like he's got an issue with being in the plane itself, and so he's starting to freak out and unable to kind of operate it properly while he's in there.
Yeah, and he also has this problem where he's seen that attacking this monster will get it to attack you.
Uh-huh.
And you don't get this until a little later on, but after all of this happens, you find out that he'd gotten a letter from his mother that said, "Come home alive no matter what." And so that's what's sitting on his mind during all of this. It's not even necessarily a case of, he was just not going to fulfill his duty. Like he had been told by someone he respects more than anyone else that he should come home.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what he's living for. So he does come home, only to find that the war has killed off his family. There's no one left that he knows alive, and everywhere,
including it was his grandmother that told him to come home, or
his mother.
Was it his mother?
It was a letter from his mother. Yeah, his family's dead. His neighbor's family is dead, and his neighbor is like the only one that's left. That he knows, and she's angry with him for not having done his duty, and basically tells him that this is all his fault. If he had done what he was supposed to do, then this wouldn't have happened. And she's angry about it because she's lost her children and isn't coping well with that. So the whole premise of this movie, from what I had read in an interview, was that they wanted to create a Godzilla movie that took place after the war, and they gave it the name Minus One because they were taking Japan after the war at its lowest point in history, and they said, we're just going to tack on a -1 to that by throwing Godzilla into the mix and making everything worse. So that's what the -1 means, apparently.
Okay.
So he comes back, his family's gone, he has nothing, he has to look for work, he ends up he ends up, just by freak coincidence, some woman is being chased by the police for stealing something, and
okay.
she hands off a child to this pilot and runs away. And so he's kind of just hanging around with this baby, and at one point he's going to like get up and leave it, and then he goes back and picks it up again, and he just can't bring himself to leave it, and then finally he starts walking away with it, thinking that, oh, well, no one's going to come back, so I guess this is my responsibility now.
Okay.
And then the woman that left it with him like reappears, down a side street, and they end up getting together and deciding to work together to help raise this child, because the child's not hers either. It's the child's mother was dying, and so she sort of left it with this girl that didn't know what she was doing.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
And this is all like the early human story part of the Godzilla movie that kind of that probably made it as good as it was. Right. Because normally you're not there for the human story. Normally it's like, all right, let's get all this out of the way. Let's get to Godzilla.
But the human story in this one was particularly strong, from what I understand.
Yeah, it was a good way to segue Godzilla into the storyline to show just how devastating it was to have this extra problem for all of these characters to deal with after the tragedy of war.
Well, so this is, I mean, like, can we dig into this first part of the movie in any particular way, and especially in the sense of show don't tell? Can you give me any examples of where show don't tell was particularly important in this first chunk of the movie?
Well, almost everything that I just told you is done with almost no dialogue.
Oh,
Really?
You're
watching the characters meander around in destroyed homes, and they're showing scenes of people, people are hungry, his neighbor comes back when he finds out that the two of them have this child, and they don't say anything about this, but you can sort of piece together what's going on in her head, because she was originally angry at him because he hadn't fulfilled his duty and her children were dead. And then she finds out they have this child. She's like eavesdropping on them. He comes walking out of the house, and she's asking about this child and this woman and where they're from.
Yeah.
And so she shows up with a bag of rice and says, "This is for the child." And she kind of like, she's still talking down to them, like, almost in a motherly way at this point, where she's telling them, this isn't, what you do for the child, for this, and here's some food. This isn't for you. This is only for the child. And she walks away. And then as the movie goes on, some time passes, and you realize that you get to see scenes of her over there with the child, and you realize that she's sort of become a nanny for this kid. And so they've got like this little family now where, everyone kind of came together under dire circumstances, and there's a lot of tension because the guy who's the pilot, he still hasn't come to terms with the fact that all those people on that island died. Like the guy that survived with him gave him a bunch of pictures that belonged to these people that showed their families, and he keeps going back to them and looking at them. And these are a lot of the scenes where you get to see that you're not being told about his internal struggle, but you're seeing him constantly going back to these pictures and leaving them out on a table. And just like, he can't let it go. He can't forget about any of that.
No, I mean, that makes sense. He's in kind of this issue where he's being forced to take responsibility no matter which way he goes, right? Like, if he had done his quote unquote duty as a kamikaze pilot, he it wouldn't have changed anything. Those people still would have died, but they're still telling him that this was his responsibility. And
the pictures were the people from the island where Godzilla attacked. Where he could have saved them if he had shot Godzilla.
Well, no, but he didn't save them because the idea that he was going to be forced to, like, it was the plane. Like, if you just given him a rifle, right? A rifle with the same capability as the airplane thing, he probably would have come through. But because he had been forced into this dire situation, it made him.
Well, they all had rifles. Rifles weren't doing anything to Godzilla.
I mean a hypothetical rifle that was as powerful as the airplane gun, right? That's my point.
Well, we don't know that. We don't know exactly what's going on through his head in the airplane, but we.
Well, you said that he seems like he's freaking out. So
yeah, he seems like he's having a bit of like an episode, just between everything that's going on and what's going on in his. I mean, that could be one possibility of what happened is exactly what you said. Maybe a piece of him was like, but if everyone here dies, I don't have to go and die. But that didn't seem like his character throughout the rest of the movie.
No, I'm not saying that necessarily. I'm saying that just being in the plane was so traumatic that he wasn't able to, because of what he was being forced to do. That he was traumatized to the point where just being in the plane made him unable to do what he even if he thought he should do it, he just couldn't do it. Right? Like that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. But yeah, go. I mean, I'm just speculating at this point. So
yeah, they do that throughout the whole movie with this character. His whole thing is he is hung up on this one moment in time that was kind of like the big turning point for everything in his life.
Yeah.
And you get to see these characters living together because this doesn't take place like instantaneously. Several years pass where him and this woman live
years.
together and raise this child. And there's news of Godzilla. You know, there were several attacks here and there, but because of the Cold War in America and Russia, there's not a lot of help that Japan's getting with dealing with this monster, and it has yet to come to shore and do anything. But it's like been on the sea destroying vessels, and you know they're not really getting any help from anywhere else in the world, so they're like on their own.
Okay.
And then you know the movie before Godzilla gets into it again is largely these scenes of, you know, he finds a job, he gets a job on a boat where they're going out and removing mines from the ocean.
Right.
And, you know, they show a lot of the characters like they get on the boat, they will grab the mines with these hooks and clip them so that they float to shore, and then they've got a gun on the boat that they use to shoot the mines and blow them up.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's the big job he gets, and he's telling the woman that he's living with, it's like, this is risky, but it pays a lot. This is what I'm going to do, and she's clearly worried about him dying. She's like, you need to do something less dangerous. But then it's like it seems to work out. So you know they're just like dropping hints that she actually really cares about him and isn't just there because you know he was supplying for them.
Yeah.
And then later in the movie, she actually gets a job. And he's a bit disappointed when he finds out because he's like, well, I'm making plenty of money. Isn't that good enough? And
yeah,
you know, there's just a couple little situations like that where it's like, well, are these two going to stick together or what's going to go on here? And
all the while they're still dealing with the child, right?
Yeah. And they have this scene before she decides that she's going to get a job. There's this scene where he's sitting around in his house with they've basically built a little hut in the ruins of, you know, where the town he used to live in.
Yeah.
And they've got some friends over, his co-workers from the fishing boat that's, you know, pulling up all these mines.
Yeah.
And who are characters in themselves in the movie. Like one of the guys that's on the boat with him is the best character in the whole movie. He's barely in it, but he's just the most fun every time he's in a scene. You know, they gave him a scene where, you know, he's talking to everyone about, you know, they've got to obey the rules. They got to listen to this. They got to listen to that. They're one of the first boats that has a big interaction with Godzilla. And,
okay.
You know, they're going to, they've been given the duty of going out and keeping an eye on, you know, this area where Godzilla may appear. And he's like, you know, I don't want to be here, but that's what they told us to do. Godzilla shows up. And he's like, guys, we're getting out of here. And they're like, what happened to obeying the rules and, you know, following all the orders that you're given? He said, yeah, there's a limit. He says something like, yeah, there's a limit or something like that.
Yeah.
It's absolutely great. But he's a great character. He's one of those characters where it's like you feel like he has the most solid footing of any of the characters in the movie.
Yeah.
And so like everyone else that's on, there's 4 guys on the boat, and he's like the guy that they can all lean on to make sure that, you know, everything's getting done properly. A very collected character. They don't really develop much about him other than he digs into the main character a few times about his relationship, and he's like, you need to marry this woman. This is your life now. You know, you've taken responsibility for this. But he's sitting around with all of these guys at dinner while she's in the kitchen, and he says, they ask him about whether he's going to marry her or not. And he says that that's not his wife and this isn't his kid. He actually tells the kid that, he says, I'm sorry, but I'm not your real father. And
Yeah.
he doesn't feel like he's gotten to the point where, he still feels like he's fighting this war that he was in. And it's because of Godzilla that he's kind of stuck in that.
Okay.
Because that was, he didn't even think Godzilla was real for a while until he started hearing about it on the radio.
Okay, interesting.
And so when Godzilla does appear, he sort of feels like he's responsible in some way for doing something about it. And this,
yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So this kind of culminates with a scene where after he made the comment about not being the husband or the father, in the next couple of scenes, you get to see where she decided to go out and get a job in Ginza.
Okay.
And she's kind of telling him that's like, you're still stuck in this war and we need to move on. And she's not leaving him, but she's like, well, we've got the neighbor to take care of the kid while I'm gone. I can go out and make more money. And if anything happens with your job, whatever. They set it up like you can't really tell if she's planning on leaving him or what, but she's just like, she's not happy with the situation, basically. And so she goes out and gets a job.
Okay.
And they stick together, and she happens to be working her job in Ginza. Guess where Godzilla attacks?
Ginza?
Absolutely. And
okay.
The devastation. I mean, it's a very short scene for a Godzilla movie. It's almost ironic that this movie was as good as it was, because one of my biggest complaints about the first Legendary Pictures movie is that Godzilla is hardly in the movie.
Yeah.
Now, Godzilla is in this movie significantly more than in that movie, but he's hardly in the movie, and somehow this movie is easily
Still
my
good.
fourth favorite Godzilla movie. It is fantastic.
All right.
And they bring him into Ginza. He utterly is just destroying these buildings. They did a great job of showing him, walking through the town, turning around, knocking buildings over, bumping into them. It was fun to see.
Okay.
And then they finally showed the Godzilla trademark nuclear breath. Oh my God, they turned this thing into a Kamehameha. It was just utterly annihilated Ginza. It's
wow.
like they did a scene where it's got like Godzilla in the foreground showing the destruction in the... You don't even know just how far away this destruction happened. You don't really get a good sense of like... But it's like, it's distant.
Yeah.
And it's like mushroom cloud, nuclear holocaust explosion after he vaporizes a pathway through Ginza. And the blowback ends up, buildings shatter around him, and there's all this dirt and debris. And when the Godzilla attack started, the pilot had immediately taken off to go to Ginza to, go rescue his girlfriend or whatever she is.
Yeah.
And she's running one way down a street. He's running another. They happen to find each other, and they start running away. And after Godzilla, does the breath thing, that's when everyone's standing around watching, like, what is this thing doing now? This is before anyone's seen this before.
Yeah.
The aftermath kills a bunch of the people that were standing around just watching, just from the blowback, from the impact.
Yeah.
The concussive force. She pushes him down an alley, which totally wouldn't have saved him from this, but it does.
Okay.
And she ends up being blown away. And it was such a powerful impact that you're looking at this like, well, there's no way she's alive.
Yeah.
So he actually gets saved by this woman and gets to see her killed, which cements in him this hatred and anger towards Godzilla. And this focus on he's going to finish his war one way or another.
Yeah.
Now, one of the people that was on the boat with him is a scientist who he's apparently some bigwig in the government, and he had been on that boat with them as, I guess, part of his research, along with doing the job of removing these mines.
Right.
But, he ends up putting together all these people to come up with a plan to try and kill Godzilla.
And so just to get a sense of scale here, the new Godzilla, or the full size Godzilla, is usually a couple 100 feet tall, kind of thing.
Yes, it's somewhat implied after the initial viewing that you get of the small Godzilla.
Yeah.
That there were some nuclear tests and things. They show some nuclear footage and some atomic bomb footage.
Okay.
They do like an English voiceover of old. I'm guessing it's old recordings of. Well, not old recordings, but I mean like you get to hear a bit of like radio transmissions about Godzilla in like old style recording.
Oh, okay.
And it's assumed that the nuclear tests cause Godzilla to become larger. They don't ever actually say that. They just show a bit of this, and it's like you saw Godzilla and he was small and he was part of this island's legend, so you assume that he was never really bigger than that up until that point. And then nuclear war happens, and now you have this giant monster. And the rest of the world isn't interested in doing anything about it, so Japan's kind of on their own. Okay. And they don't they don't have much they can work with. They end up somehow getting a couple of battleships that are sort of so the scientist sort of worked it out. They don't really explain who he is in government, but he apparently has the pull to where between him and a couple of former Navy generals, they're able to secure a couple of battleships from the Japanese government and get NATO to allow them to use them on the oceans so that they can try and do something about Godzilla. Now, Godzilla has destroyed a couple of battleships at this point. I think he takes down the Yamato at some point. I can't remember if it was I think it was the Yamato, because they did a great scene where Godzilla just rises up next to this boat and they're pummeling him with cannon fire and he just brings it down.
Wow.
It's the visuals in this movie for a $15 million movie are absolutely incredible. So probably they might be the best visuals I remember seeing in a movie for the past like 3 or 4 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, it's all that green screen stuff that was in a lot of the Marvel movies. It all started to get stale, where it's just like, okay, there's the bright purpley colors and the big old circles, and there's not any actual like detail to anything. It's just lights. It's like a laser light show from the 1980s.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
So this is a significant improvement in the visual factor. Yeah. And they get the idea across that Godzilla is a force to be reckoned with pretty quickly early on. They even had a scene where they're trying to use the mines that they're deactivating to try and blow up Godzilla from the inside. That was what the main characters ended up doing the first time they try to take on Godzilla. When they first meet him on the ocean and they're on their dinky little fishing boat trying to run away from him, they end up setting off a landmine right inside his mouth, which plays an important part in the movie later on.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So Godzilla has now pretty much destroyed Ginza. He disappears again. Nobody knows when he's coming back. Yeah. And all of these characters, a lot of them former Navy, and I mean, most of these people are just people that survived the war, and they don't want anything to do with war anymore, and now they're stuck with this situation. There's this former general or some high-ranking naval officer is part of this team with this doctor that secures these boats, and they come up with a plan where they're going to try and sink. They're going to wrap a bunch of what was it? Was it Freon or something? They're going to wrap these gas canisters around Godzilla in the ocean, and their plan is to sink him in the ocean really quickly so that the pressure from the ocean will crush him. And then they're going to try and raise him to the surface again really quickly, so that if that doesn't kill him, his blood will boil and he'll be killed from the inside out.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Some sense, I guess.
I mean, it's if it's something that you can actually pull off, it's not a bad plan to kill a giant monster. It's sure. I mean, it would effectively kill just about anything. And I won't go into all the details of what happens with the plan and everything, but suffice to say, the movie kind of ends up where the pilot has put himself in the situation where it's him or Godzilla, one way or the other. And he decides that the way that he's going to handle this is he's going to fulfill his duty, his original duty, and he's going to kamikaze himself into Godzilla.
Oh, okay.
So he has to secure a plane, which this doctor that he's been working with is able to do for him. And he's like single mindset this whole time. Is like this is all he cares about. He isn't even like he's not even really caring for his daughter at one point. He's kind of like sloughing off a lot of the responsibility on his neighbor. Yeah. He's getting ready to die and he knows it. So he puts together some money and a bunch of things for her for when he's gone and gives it to his neighbor. And this is where you get to see a lot of the change in the characters towards him, where he goes out looking for the mechanic from the island that survived.
Yeah.
And he's desperate to find this guy because they've got an airplane that didn't really get much use during the war. It was like a new prototype that they never got to use. And he gets this doctor to get him this plane. They're going to take one of the gas tanks out and replace it with a bomb, because from what he believes after what he saw on the boat, he was able to do more damage to Godzilla with that landmine, with that mine.
Sea mine.
Yeah, the sea mine. From the inside, it like blew off half of Godzilla's face before Godzilla could regenerate.
Okay.
And he figures that if he can fly a plane into Godzilla with enough explosive, he can kill Godzilla from the inside. So
okay, interesting.
He manages to get this mechanic to find him by, sending out these letters saying that the whole thing on the island wasn't his fault. He wasn't to blame at all, and it was this mechanic's fault. And so this guy hunts him down.
Yeah.
And once he finally finds him, he actually kidnaps the main character, and he's like beating on him, and like, why would you put this letter out? That's not true, and what happened to those people is your fault.
Yeah.
And he tells him that no, this was the plan. He needed to find him. He had a plane he needed him to fix, and he has decided he's going to kill himself by flying into Godzilla, and he's going to save everyone that way. And so the mechanic changes his tune, and he's like, all right, I'm going to help you with this. Now, all of the best character development in the story happens in these last few scenes where you get to see all of the people that were angry at this pilot, and even the people that were his friends, like they kind of see it in his eyes almost, where some of the people are telling him, don't do anything drastic, because his role in this is supposed to be to take this plane and fly it around and get Godzilla into position, like taunt him into position so that they can pull off this plan. And they need to do this before he uses his heat breath, because Godzilla could essentially wipe out all of these boats in one go if he manages to use his heat breath. So they have to distract him and get him to use it before they get him to use it once, and then the doctor is kind of like figures that it would take Godzilla time to be able to recharge and do it again, and that's when we have to do the main attack. Okay. They have a lot of stuff happening. The boats encircle Godzilla, yada, yada, yada. But the point is, this mechanic fixed up this plane, and they really foreshadowed what was going to happen. Like it was kind of obvious, but they kind of showed him looking at part of the plane, and you can see like, oh, I know what's going to happen here. He's kind of like, he doesn't actually want this guy to kill himself. Yeah. And so you find out in some of the last scenes that all these people kind of realize the pilot was planning on killing himself, and they really don't want him to. They try to talk him out of it. His neighbor, who had initially told him he hadn't fulfilled his duty, she gets a letter from him. You don't get to see what's in the letter, but you get to see the look on her face, and you realize that she realizes that he's planning on killing himself. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and spoil the end of the movie, because I've already spoiled most of it anyway. That's fine. This mechanic that had this grudge with him had pulled him aside right before it was time for him to take off in this plane, and he told him, look, you've got to pull this lever right before you make your final run. This'll arm the bomb. Okay. And then he says, and now I want you to see this, and he moves him aside. He's like, this here, these model airplanes, these were some of the first line that had ejection seats put in them. So what you're going to want to do right before, and he's just like, and you're looking at the pilot's face, and he's kind of like looking at this guy that he knows kind of hates him, and he just doesn't have anything else to say, so he just looks at him and goes, "Thank you," and that's all you get from that, and it's kind of like this whole thing where this guy hated him this whole movie, but in the last couple of minutes, you get to see him listening on the radio, just making sure that the pilot actually ejected himself from the plane. He's just like hanging on, listening to this radio, like, oh, come on, please. And you know that he didn't really want this guy to kill himself. So it's like you get to see these characters come full circle and realize that, they're kind of all in this together. And, even through the bad times, they've they need to work together to get this stuff taken care of.
Right. Okay.
It's a phenomenal bit of storytelling from start to finish to see all these characters, have these turnarounds in opinion, and there's a point at which it looks like Godzilla's not going down, and he's going to pull off the heat breath one final time. Everybody's on these boats, and they're just in a line where Godzilla's going to take them all out at once. I don't know why they did that. Don't ask me.
Yeah.
But you get to see even like the doctor, who's the cheeriest person in the whole movie, is just looking on, and you can see the despair in everyone's face. Like, this is it, we're done. And that's when he decides to fly the plane into Godzilla's mouth. The pilot just appears out of nowhere, which is also kind of funny because he was actually there the whole time and they knew it.
Yeah.
But, he dive bombs Godzilla, and it was a really, really, like, it was like a good mix of old Godzilla where it's like, that's a toy airplane, and like, but they did a good enough job with it where it's just like, oh, that's kind of how it might have looked in real life. It's
okay.
It had a lot of realism to it, while also you get to see like the work they did to make this happen with these models and things that they used.
Yeah. So there was a lot of practical effects?
Yeah, lots of practical effects, lots of sets. There wasn't much green screening at all, if any. I'm trying to think of. I mean, there must have been for the heat breath scene in Ginza, but most of the movie was practical effects.
Nice.
They top this movie off with everyone looking, and they're like, oh, he sacrificed himself for us. And a lot of them are still kind of downtrodden from this because they're like, we didn't want to lose anyone in this operation.
Yeah.
And then, and then they see his parachute, and it's kind of like going into this movie, everyone had talked about it like it was a depressing film, and it was supposed to highlight, Japan being at its lowest low.
Yeah.
And I kind of, the way I felt, going into it was like, oh, well, this is probably going to have a depressing ending, and depressing endings are like the norm on Netflix shows and a lot of new movies. A lot of things end on a down note where it's like, see the next movie for the up note. And everything at the end of this movie, getting past all the devastation and seeing everything everyone went through, you get to the end of the movie and everything is just, it's this glorious up note after this horrendously depressing situation that you've been forced to sit through. You get to see this mechanic. He doesn't really hate this guy anymore. He's forgiven him. He's glad to see him come through this alive. You get to see his neighbor showing up at the docks at the end of the movie with what is essentially his child, and you can see her like crying and looking at him, and she sort of slaps him on the shoulder, holding the letter that he sent, in a sort of, how could you even think of doing this kind of way? But then, she's glad to see him alive. And you're thinking at that point, it's like, okay, so he comes back alive. He's got this kid. He's been forgiven by all these people. There's people that actually love this guy now that hated him before.
Right. A lot of development.
And then his neighbor pulls out this letter and hands it to him. And you can almost tell exactly what it means when you see the look on his face. He is out of there. And it's, again, their foreshadowing wasn't really very secretive. You kind of know where this is going. And it turns out that the woman he'd been living with had been horrendously injured and was in a hospital in Ginza all this time.
Oh.
And she had only just recently woken up and been able to tell, get a letter to this person. This person knows me. He needs to know where I am.
Okay. Wow.
So you get a completely happy ending out of this movie that was hyped up as, absolute despair.
The very bottom of the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fantastic. It is a wonderful way to end a movie. And it's great to walk out of a theater feeling good for a change, instead of like, okay, well, technically the good guys won, but none of them are happy about it for some reason. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go into all the details of the movie. I covered quite a few of the important ones, and I covered a lot. But
let's talk more specifically about the writing. If there was someone who was going to use this movie as an example of good writing techniques, what scenes and what lessons can be learned from this movie?
So one of the best scenes was probably that scene at the end of the movie where his neighbor is both angry at him for planning on kamikazing himself into Godzilla, but relieved to see that it all worked out. And, you know, you get more of what she's going through by the look on her face and her crying and looking at him and giving him that half-hearted, like, slap on the shoulder for doing what he did. And she's, like, crumpling this letter in her hand. All of this scenery tells you more about what's going on with her than her sitting down and talking to him about why he shouldn't have done that and why she's glad that he came back. Like that's how it would have happened in a lot of Western movies. He would have come back and there would have been an entire scene of dialogue between the two of them explaining how she felt. And that's garbage. Throw that right out the window. If you want to do a monologue, you've got to add the monologue in with... The monologue has to have a reason to be there. There is no reason to express that kind of emotion in monologue. Nothing comes to mind, no situation where it's like, you're never going to get your point across through just having someone telling you how they feel. That was the best show don't tell moment in the entire story. Now, a lot of the other ones, the opening scene of him sitting on that island gives you a sense of how morose this character is. You know, they filmed him at like an evening sun sort of backdrop with the ocean waves rolling over this outcrop of rocks, and he's just sitting there staring out, and you don't know what he's thinking about, but you know he's thinking something that's not particularly happy just by the expression on his face. There's a very rugged sense of military events going around with just a handful of people on this set. You know, you've got like 12 guys running around in the background, all dressed as mechanics. You've got a couple of airplanes sitting there, you know, people poking and prodding at things in the background, and just two characters in the foreground having a moment where, you know, where one of them is saying, you know, I'm on your side with this. And there's not much dialogue beyond that. Like, that's the only line that really mattered that he said. There were maybe like 3 or 4 things they said, and he walks away. And so you know everything that's happening to this character now. And, you know, you know what's probably going through his head. And then you get dropped hints as time goes on, rather than having the whole situation explained to you about how he's a pilot. He didn't want to kamikaze himself. He wanted to get home to his mother like she asked him to. You get the bits and pieces. You see him. You see that he didn't fulfill his duty. You see that he lied about the airplane. You still don't have his full story yet, because you don't find out why he lied until he gets back and has a flashback about the letter from his mother. It's much better than like ramming the viewer with all of this information at once and then expecting the rest of the scenery to sort of fill in the details. And,
like, what if for instance, there had been an extended scene of him tampering with something on the airplane and like saying, like, to himself, I gotta get this engine so that it's, you know, messed up so that I don't have to do this. And he's just like, you know, I can imagine such a monologue happening, but it's better if you don't.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things about it is you get a sense of him being a very good pilot throughout the movie, but you don't actually see him fly anything until the end. It's you know, he shows up on the boat for removing the mines, and they pull up a mine, and they got this guy who's just opening fire trying to hit this thing from like 300 yards, and he kind of moves the guy aside, and, you know, because he was a gunner on an airplane. He's like, no, this is how you do it. Here, watch. And he shows him, he takes a couple shots and blows up the mine. And he's talking about leading and, you know, paying attention to the rocking of the boat and trying to get a good sense of where the bullets are going to come down as the boat's moving, so that you only have to fire off a couple of rounds. They paint him as very competent at what he does. They did a lot with Godzilla in the movie that you didn't really need to see him that much in the movie to get a sense of just how much of a threat he was.
Like what?
You know, they would show boats that had been eviscerated. They showed a lot of scenes of like fish dying from deep in the, like deep sea fish were bubbling to the surface in pools of blood, and you would kind of see like at the beginning of the movie, when the small Godzilla first shows up on the island, that's one of the first things you see is these deep sea fish. There's a pile of, dead fish that bob to the surface and start floating up against some rocks while the pilot is sitting there looking out over the ocean.
Okay, interesting. So,
I mean, even without Godzilla, it was, as a standalone movie, it would have been a good movie. It's one of those rare cases where I could almost see, if I didn't know that they had written this as a Godzilla movie, I could almost see where they had a script for an entirely different movie and they just threw Godzilla in it.
There's definitely the sense in which Godzilla is not like Godzilla is a more abstract plot element. He represents this pilot's desire to feel as if he's done his duty kind of thing. So there's a lot of different ways that you could have an element in the plot for the pilot to achieve his duty. But in this case, they chose to use Godzilla, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, and there was a lot of messaging in there about how poorly the Japanese government had operated during World War II. Like they made some mentions about how they could have put ejection seats in planes, and they could have not lied to the people about how badly the war was going. Because Japan would have entire ships disappear in the war, shot down or sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and they wouldn't even mention it on the news at the time. It was just like, nope, everything's going great, and anything bad that happened, it's like training exercise went poorly and cost us some lives, yada yada, and then they just sort of gloss over it.
Interesting.
So there was particularly, like, the one part of the movie I thought could have been done a little better. The scientist guy is very reminiscent of modern Japanese movies, where they will take a serious situation and the actor will read off dialogue almost in an immature, childish sort of way. He gives a speech about how they all have to, they all have to do this together. Everyone's got to do their part. The government of Japan hasn't always been the most supportive to the citizens in these, during the war. And, it's up to them, and they as a country need to stop treating each other as something just to be thrown away when the chips are down. And it wasn't that it was a bad speech. It was just that it kind of felt like there was that movie Sanjuro, and they remade it several years ago, like I think in early 2000s. Yeah, I remember. I never watched all of it. I watched like 10 minutes of it, and I was like, this is not Sanjuro. But like our friend Ramon, he told me that he watched the movie and he said it was more like kids playing Sanjuro than actually Sanjuro.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
And I thought that was a good way of describing it. And I kind of felt that sort of modern Japanese film style in that speech. But that was it. That was like the only thing in the movie that I could even find to criticize. And it wasn't even that. It wasn't bad. It wasn't even like mildly bad. It was just like, oh, this kind of feels like more modern Japanese storytelling. It was definitely a bit more tell than show, but I guess they wanted that rousing speech moment to try and, get everyone hyped up for what they were going to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it was then that the movie really started moving towards that more upbeat moment where, they had a bunch of people that were formerly in the Navy. They were, they're loading up the boats. They're getting ready to try and pull off this plan. Everyone's working together, and there's actually people standing around kind of like nodding and smiling like, yeah, this is, everyone's feeling pretty good about this, you know?
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, I would say that if the movie's going to be out of theater, well, the movie will probably be out of theaters by the time anyone hears this, but
it'll be on streaming by the time they hear this, probably.
Yeah, it'll be somewhere. This movie, hands down, was the best theatrical experience that I had this year. And I haven't seen... And
we're recording this in December. Late December. Yeah. So it's not like you're saying this is the best experience I've had so far in February.
Although I'm willing to bet it will trail over for a while.
Yeah.
There were two other movies that were pretty successful this year. It was Barbie and the Oppenheimer movie. I haven't seen either of those.
Okay.
I can promise everyone that I don't even have to see Barbie to know that I liked Godzilla better than it.
Fair enough.
That would be the biggest shock of my life to find that I liked the Barbie movie better than Godzilla, but I'm fairly certain from everything I know about it that is not going to be the case.
Right.
The Oppenheimer movie was, I don't know if it was a character dissection or what kind of movie it was, if it was just a historical movie. It seems like it focused a lot on the character himself.
Yeah.
I don't see myself liking that more than a Godzilla movie. And
no, probably not. I mean,
I've heard it's pretty depressing too, so...
yeah, well...
And it probably doesn't have any upbeat moments to it.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen any of those... I haven't seen any movies this year in theaters, so...
Godzilla is the first movie that I went to theaters to see since COVID began.
Wow. Really?
So,
Wow.
So this was the first time in a long time I've been to the theaters. Oppenheimer did not interest me enough to get me to go. Everyone was talking about it, but I was just like, yeah, but I mean, I know what happens.
Sometimes when everyone's talking about something, it's even less of a desire to see it, you know? It's like...
Yeah, sometimes it's that too, but I mean, I don't have much interest in seeing, historical dramas. I was never into those kind of movies, and even if I was, it was just like, it got hard to go back to theaters. It really took something big to get me to go back to theaters, and when I heard that they were going to release an actual Toho Godzilla movie, I was like, okay, yeah, I'll go for... Oh, no, I'm lying. I did go see Godzilla vs. King Kong when it came out in theaters.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure that was during COVID.
Sure.
I think that was a year and a half ago, actually. It was pretty recent. So that's it, though. Those are the only two movies. We're both Godzilla movies.
Well, I mean...
And Godzilla Minus One, by far, was the superior movie.
So you said it's your fourth favorite Godzilla movie. What are your three favorites above it?
All right, so coming in at number 3, and this one, it was a bit of a toss-up between this and Godzilla Minus One for the number 3 spot, but I think Shin Godzilla was more fun.
Okay.
I don't think it was as well written, but the way that they filmed it was like a step up in terms of how incredible some of the Godzilla scenes were. Like, they were both fantastic visually.
Yeah.
Considering they were both pretty low budget movies. But Shin Godzilla, I think in the end was like
just a hair above,
fun to sit through. Like, I could sit through it multiple times.
Yeah.
Whereas Godzilla Minus One is one of those movies you have to like put a month or so, maybe 2 or 3 months between viewings.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because it does drag you down for a lot of the first portion of the movie, even for all the cool scenes that they have. Like, I love the scenes where they're on the boat, fishing for the mines. Those are some of the best highlights of Godzilla Minus One.
Okay, interesting. Number 2.
Coming in at number 2, and I'm sort of cheating here because technically this is 2 movies, but the first Godzilla movie, both versions, the Japanese and the Western one. Now,
yeah,
I am of the opinion that the American versions of Godzilla, the original one, I actually liked it a bit better than the Japanese version.
Okay.
It cut out a lot of things that were fun, but not necessary for the story. It kind of changed the story up for American audiences, which I normally hate, but this happened at a time when it was just like, yeah, people aren't going to understand this in the 1950s, and
yeah,
we just got out of or 1960s, I think. It's like, 10 years ago we were at war with this nation. Let's kind of like present things with a less standoffish context or something.
Yeah, okay.
So the Raymond Burr version of the original Godzilla is my
your number 2
favorite of the 2.
Yeah.
And the original is like right next to it.
Okay.
So both of those I count as
like the same movie, but
number
like
2.
Different. Okay, fair enough.
And in the same respect, in the same respect, it came out as Godzilla 1985 here.
Right.
And I believe it was called Godzilla Returns in Japan.
Okay.
Godzilla 1985 was always my favorite Godzilla movie. It was a Godzilla movie that was filmed like a horror movie.
Yeah, yeah.
And the American version, again, kind of did what the original Godzilla did when it came to America. And they actually, the actor from the original was Raymond Burr.
Okay.
Matlock, was that Matlock am I thinking of?
No, Matlock was the...
Perry Mason. Perry Mason. I always get them confused.
Okay.
Raymond Burr was Perry Mason. And they brought him back for Godzilla 1985 to reprise his role as the reporter that had seen Godzilla back in Japan in the 60s.
Okay, cool.
They kind of wedged in this Cold War story, changed a bit of the context of this nuclear missile scene.
Yeah.
But, it was such a monster movie in the sense that not like... It played out like a horror story. Like from the beginning, there's like this little tick creature that had apparently been something that, festered on Godzilla, ended up on this boat at the beginning. And there's all this scenery of, this abandoned boat with a skeleton sitting in the captain's chair.
Okay.
A lot of dark imagery throughout the whole movie. Everything is filmed in this sort of creepy, somber tone.
Okay.
And it brought a lot of life to Godzilla as a monster that was just a force of nature to be reckoned with.
Okay, that makes sense.
The original Japanese version is, just like one notch down from the American version in my book, because the American version, it changed the pacing a little bit.
Yeah.
To where everything sort of moved a little more smoothly. It had these goofy scenes where they filmed these scenes in like some bunker. I don't know if it was like, where was it supposed to be? Was it supposed to be NORAD or somewhere like some control center where they had
sure.
They had Raymond Burr giving them advice on Godzilla. Him talking about some of the things that had happened while he was in Japan during the Godzilla attacks.
Yeah.
Those scenes largely existed for Raymond Burr to tell them, you're not ready for this. You don't know what you're dealing with, and what you're doing is not going to work.
Right.
Because they start the movie thinking that they're under attack from the Russians. One of their submarines is attacked. Or maybe it was a Russian submarine. And so anyway, there's like this high alert Cold War status thing going on.
Okay, interesting.
The original movie didn't really have much of that. They had like offhand, like, scenes of some Russian and American stuff going on, and they completely changed the context for a scene where in the American version this Russian submarine launched a nuclear missile to try and destroy Godzilla, and the Americans stopped it by intercepting the missile in orbit, I guess. It was like launched from a satellite.
Oh, okay.
In the original version, it was, I believe it was the Americans that launched the missile, and the Russians actually stopped it. So it was a complete 180 there.
Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, that's that one was my favorite. Godzilla Minus One, great movie, and probably a better written story, but it doesn't beat 1984 for me. It's just like that's the movie that really got me into Godzilla.
Right.
Because I watched it, like, my grandfather got me a copy of it when I was like 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I watched this terrifying monster movie where, it's like the saddest ending in the world is Godzilla falling into a volcano. He's the bad guy, and at the end of the movie it's like, but I like Godzilla. And then you get to watch him burn up in a volcano, and you're like, oh well. I mean,
he'll be back.
Every time someone asks me what the saddest death in a movie is, I say Godzilla 1985. Hands down.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, those are... All of the best Godzilla movies are the ones where he's a bad guy. I like some of the ones where he's the hero. I liked Godzilla 2000. He's still kind of a bad guy in that one. But he shows up and stops an alien monster that's attacking the world. Okay,
fair enough.
He's in a movie, I think it was Godzilla versus Ghidorah and Mothra, where Ghidorah and Mothra are actually the good guys in this movie, and Godzilla's the bad guy. And he's one of the most devastating Godzillas in all of the movies in that one, because it's like Ghidorah's usually an obstacle for Godzilla, and in this movie Ghidorah is struggling to stop Godzilla, and nothing is stopping him.
Oh wow, okay.
My favorite of the ones where Godzilla's a straight up hero is Godzilla versus Megalon, but again, that might have a lot to do with it being one of the first Godzilla movies I saw, and it just kind of stuck with me because it is one of the corniest movies on the planet.
Okay, fair enough.
That's the one where Jet Jaguar is holding Megalon and Godzilla comes running at him and slides on his tail to kick him in the chest.
Oh, I've seen that clip before, yeah.
It's just so corny that it's just fun to watch.
Of course.
Yeah, that's there's a lot of good from the corny ones too. Like, you get a lot of memorable corniness.
Yeah.
I don't believe in not watching a movie just because it's corny, because some of the best memories I have of movie watching were for movies that were absolute trash, but I love them.
Sure.
I think everyone's got a few of those.
I mean, everybody who watches movies regularly, sure.
Yeah. And everyone's got things that they remember
and we'll always
fondly.
have the keep.
We will always have the keep, because the world can't forget that it allowed that to happen.
That happened, and we all let that happen.
We didn't. You and I would have stopped it.
Well, we didn't stop it.
We weren't born.
Is it really that old?
I think it was a 1970s movie. Actually, I'm going to check here. Let me get some keyboard clacking going.
Oh yeah, get that meaty keyboard clacking to finish up the episode.
Yep. So The Keep, the film, 1983. So we were 2 years old. I don't think we could have done anything about that.
I was just born, but it's still a shame that I was unable to do anything.
Yeah, I feel like if someone had handed my baby hands a machine gun and told me about this movie, I would have been ready to go to war.
Yeah, I mean, that's reasonable.
But since it happened, and it's here now, we will have to talk about The Keep one day.
We will.
So I know this was supposed to largely be about the writing, and I ended up just nerding out about Godzilla for most of it. But what do you think? Do you think we had anything of substance here today? Was it?
Well, I think that your descriptions. Well, so here's the thing, right? Like, we're focusing on the notion of show don't tell, and so you're giving some scenes where this was particularly applicable. I think that since it's a good movie, if you want to see how the writing works out in more detail, you should probably go see the movie, or by the time this comes out, it'll be rent it from Amazon and see the movie, or rent it on Netflix or however Netflix works. I mean, I think it's good to look at the writing of different types of media to see how it differs from just straight up prose. So this is, I think, a good example of that as well. We've got some issues with where the visual effects are something that we have to think about, but at the same time, we've got a lot of character development. We've got a lot of character arcs where the character starts out on one side, flips, and then flips back, kind of thing over time. Justifying that kind of thing is difficult, and so if this is a good example of it, definitely give it a look and kind of diagram that to see why for instance, the mechanic character's motivations and opinions changed so much.
Yeah, as a writing exercise, my initial opinion is that anyone who's interested in this movie, go and see it first and just like enjoy it. Yeah. And then if you decide you like it and you want to watch it again, and every scene, just watch every scene and think, how are they showing rather than telling in this scene? Because that movie is just full of it. It is start to finish. There's constant show don't tell.
Okay.
Which
good exercise.
Movies are a little easier to do show don't tell in than books.
Yes, that's very true.
But you might want to sit down and think, how would I have written this scene so that I'm showing rather than telling?
So that's a really interesting point. Like just kind of like you look at an example of visual medium and think about how you would convert it to prose and still keep the show don't tell aspects of it as best you could. That's another good exercise to maybe think about if you're trying to punch up your ability to do show don't tell. So it's something that I do a lot, and I can definitely say that it's worth it to be able to write like that, because most, especially the action scenes that I've done in books, most of them I'm taking ideas from things that I've seen in movies and anime rather than read from other books. Sure.
And I've read a lot of books with action in them. Very few of them, like there's not a lot of authors I see that get the action, get the cadence of action down really well. Like there'll be action scenes, but it's largely just here's everything that happened, and now we're moving on to what happens next. Surprisingly, like Terry Pratchett was great at doing action scenes. He would really build up what the stakes were for characters, and he'd give you something to sort of hang on to before there would be some big face-off. Particularly, I'm thinking like Granny Weatherwax versus her sister in Witches Abroad.
I'm thinking... So, one of the Pratchett books that's a little bit unconventional that I actually really enjoyed was Thief of Time.
Yeah.
So that one has some good action scenes in it, I'm pretty sure. It's been a long time since I've read it, but I remember it being very vibrant when I read it. So, because a lot of his books, a lot of Pratchett's books can, and I'm not trying to be down on Pratchett at all, but like he gets into the satire a little too much. And
it's his later books, but that's actually
Yeah.
one of his later ones that did not do that.
Right. So that's another recommendation, perhaps. Thief of Time by Terry Pratchett.
Anything by Terry Pratchett.
I mean,
But Thief of Time was a really good one. That's one of the ones I haven't reread that much.
Yeah.
I'm probably 10 years overdue for rereading that book.
it's on my shelf right now. I managed to find a hardcover copy of it at some used bookstore back in the day and picked it up, and it is a good book.
Yeah, he started getting away from his main characters and created newer characters for each novel
Right.
for a while. And he started getting a lot heavier into the satire later on. I think we talked about this before.
We did, yeah, in our influences episode, I'm pretty sure.
And they were still great books. I'll
Oh,
always
yeah.
be a bigger fan of the early ones that were more fantasy-based, but
Yeah, of course.
his sense of humor was persistent from start to finish in all of his books, with the exception maybe of, oh God, what was it called?
I don't know.
I'm blanking on his first really big novel, which was a parody of Larry Niven's Ringworld.
Okay.
It wasn't called Discworld, though. It was called something else.
I don't know offhand.
And I'm actually surprised that I'm looking at my Pratchett books, all of my hardcovers, and I'm not seeing it. I must have hidden it away somewhere. I don't know why it's not up there.
It ended up in a box like your copy. Didn't you have a couple of like PS Vita games that you lost for a couple of years?
Yeah, and I still don't understand how that happened. That was a funny moment in time. It was just it just appeared one day, and I was like, I looked here. It wasn't here before.
I totally looked here.
But yeah, this nope. I've got the computer right here. We may as well clickety clack a little more. Let's
Go for it.
First, Terry Pratchett, and that was
Drum roll.
The Carpet People.
Okay. And that was a parody of Ringworld?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. Right.
Wait, was this?
I don't know.
Is this the book I'm thinking of? Let's see. I think it was. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
But it was like the first book that he wrote was it was like his proto Discworld, because it takes place on a world that is a disc that he's kind of making fun of Ringworld by Larry Niven with the Discworld.
Of course, yeah.
And it was a sci-fi story where they go to this planet, and
planet in quotes,
and they're like investigating what's going on here, like how is this planet even possible?
Okay.
And they find a bunch of weird, fantastical fantasy stuff on this planet. It's like these 3 different alien races are working together to try and figure out what's going on.
Sure.
There's it's been a long time since I've read it, so I don't remember any of the details, except they had this box that could basically print anything up for them, like a 3D printer or like a Star Trek little kind of matter machine.
Replicator, yeah.
Yeah, but it was like everything that he ended up making into Discworld kind of started with this story in terms of the Discworld itself, and then he sort of moved into writing fantasy stories that actually took place on this Discworld.
Sure, okay, that makes sense.
I don't know if anyone ever confirmed that it was supposed to be the same world, or if that was a completely separate one, and then he just ran with the idea for the Discworld books.
Yeah.
But they were all fun books, and that particular book was very, very different from his following books. It had a little bit less of the humor. It was a lot more like Piers Anthony or Robert Asprin in the way the jokes came off in that book, and there were a lot less jokes. Like it was a lot more of a serious sci-fi story, but the undertone was one of everything in this world is ridiculous. Okay,
fair enough. Sounds like fun.
So yeah, Terry Pratchett and Godzilla. You can't go wrong. It's like rum and Coke. I think. I don't know. I don't drink. Is that good?
I don't drink either. I don't know.
No wonder all we've got to talk about is books.
Yeah, pretty much.
Books and Godzilla movies, a great replacement for alcohol.
Fair enough.
Welcome to my AA program.
12-page program.
And we just, and there's another crowd canceling us. The AA people are now...
It's all right. They'll relapse. All right. I think we've got an episode here. We talked about Godzilla Minus One and the writing in that, especially, as best we could. It was a half-blind review because I still haven't seen the movie, but it sounds like I really should go see it, and it looks like tomorrow's the day to do that, because after that it's gone from theaters in my area. So all of you who are listening to this, it should be up on streaming services and your favorite, movie rental places, like streaming rental places. So go give it a look if you want to understand the show don't tell. So yeah, go ahead.
We don't really know what we're going to talk about next time, but we
rarely know what we're going to talk about next time when we're actually talking about it.
Yeah, we wing it every time. We kind of just sit down beforehand and what do we want to do?
The Pippi Longstocking episode was a huge anomaly.
Yeah, that was the one that I sort of came in with that, and I was like, we should do this, and
let's do this.
And then you read a bunch of them, and I watched the wrong movie, and
right.
But it was so far that's been my favorite one that we've done, but I won't know for sure until I actually listen to it.
I just edited it and it was fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to that one when it comes out. I'm going to wait until it actually comes out and listen to it again.
Yeah. Because you don't have my file anyway.
Right. I'm just going to have you send all of those to me at some point, or I'll just download them. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, either or. I can send them to you. We can use we're getting in the weeds. Next week. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we should probably try to get to some actual writing stuff for a week instead of doing.
Yeah, we did get away from it. I think the Pippi Longstocking was the last book thing that we did, and we kind of got away from writing for a while.
we did hard versus soft magic after that, and doing action and fight scenes. I think.
Yeah, we'll try to come up with a good writing topic for next time.
Well, what about so. We've been talking about this for a long time, but there's that sequel to H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, Massacre of Mankind.
That could be the next one. That might be a good
time,
one.
Maybe.
But I don't just think we should do book reviews either, though.
No. I agree, but we could also talk about publishing. You just had an adventure with publishing, soft and hardcover, and that might be.
Well, we did talk about that last time.
Did we? Okay, then I forgot to put the word check next to that one.
We talked about the printing process, and we talked about we did talk about different publishing, different places you can publish. I don't think we went into too much detail with that. We could do that. That might be a good one for next week.
Sure.
Get to something that could specifically help someone that maybe has something written or half written and is getting ready to publish.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. We will try to do something for that. All right. So, yeah, thanks for listening to episode 15 of the Wordy Pair podcast. I'm Rudy.
And Justin.
And we will see you next time. Or you will hear us next time. Applicable
there will be
idiom.
Something...
Eject!
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.